Welcome to this video dealing with the new Solicitors Regulation Authority's regime on continuing competence for training for solicitors in England and Wales. This is the biggest change for some 30 years. We're moving from the old 16 hours a year to continuing competence from 1st November 2016. And I'm very delighted to have Anna Shaw with me today. Anna, do you want to just say a few words about yourself?
Thank you, Mark. Well, I work with Wilmington Legal, which supports legal professionals with education and information and training and conferences to help them understand various aspects of their legal practice. And my current role is particularly focused on helping people to understand the Solicitors Regulation Authority's new regime and how they can implement it in their own firm and their own practice.
I think it's right to say part of your remit is the Solicitors Journal magazine, and I think the magazine did a survey some 2014 looking at continuing competence then, and I've just conducted a new one. What are the main findings of the current survey?
Well, the current survey found a very positive response in that people appreciate the flexible approach that they will have to training under the new regime. They can decide what works for them. The drawback that people see is the compliance aspect of it. Obviously, under the old regime, it was very clear cut. You'd done 16 hours or you hadn't. But under the new regime, it's about reflecting on yourself and your own practice and then thinking about what activities you might carry out to fulfil that training requirement. So it's just a bit less clear, and I think people have some concerns about how that will play out in practice.
I think it's right to say that over the past couple of years there has been some resistance to the new regime. I think people liked the simplicity of the 16 hours. But I think the effect of that was a lot of solicitors did most of their training in September or October just to get their points in, as it were. But the new regime is really a process. Do you know how to explain that to us?
It is. So what's really key under the new regime is that actually, as you say, it's a continuous process. It's not something that you do towards the end of the year to tick the box. It's something that you need to start thinking about at really the very beginning of the year and then reflecting at regular intervals throughout the year to make sure that the development plan that you set for yourself or the goals that you've set, you're actually working towards them.
I think it's also right to say that over the last couple of years it's been possible to opt into the new system, even though it formally doesn't start for everyone from the 1st of November. How many people have actually opted in already?
Well, our Solicitors Journal survey suggested that actually only around 24% of firms have already opted in.
Around a quarter.
Indeed, which is rather lower than other surveys have previously suggested. And indeed, 55% have said that they definitely haven't moved to the new regime. Something that's perhaps a little concerning is that 22% of our respondents said they didn't know whether they were already operating under the new regime, which I think does give an indication that actually the communication about this new regime is really important.
So perhaps 1 in 5 really don't know what's going on.
Indeed, but on the positive side, nearly 75% of respondents said that the firm was ready, they just elected not to opt in yet. But there were about 10% of firms who said that they didn't really yet have a plan in place.
Sure. So what message would you give to any solicitor now?
Well, I think, the new regime is very nearly upon us, so it's absolutely time to start thinking about it. But the good news is that about 80% of our respondents said that their firm had used more or less existing processes, perhaps tweaked them, perhaps streamlined them, perhaps added some more detail. But actually it's not a case of having to reinvent the wheel. It's a case of looking at what you've already got and seeing how that aligns with the new regime.
I suppose in its simplest form it's a 3-stage process. There's a reflection on what you need to do, selecting what programme or activity you need to undertake, and then collecting it or recording it in some way. How do firms intend to monitor compliance with the new regime?
Well, as I say, this is the particular challenge that firms see, and they're taking various different approaches to how they will monitor that. 55% of our respondents said they'll use a system that allows managers to see what training has been recorded. And obviously this will be essential in particular for firms that are looking to do a bulk renewal of the practising certificate, i.e. a bulk declaration for all their solicitors. It's very important that they know that people have actually done the training that they have
Can I just interrupt you there? I think it's right to say that it's both an individual responsibility for the individual solicitor, but also a firm or organisation-wide responsibility.
It is
isn't it?
indeed, and I think many firms are looking to place primary responsibility on the individual, but obviously that isn't to say that the firm doesn't have its own requirements. And indeed, I think as good practice, many compliance officers would really want to be confident that the systems are in place to actually monitor, for example, should the SRA ever come to look at records. So a lot of firms, in fact 53% of our respondents, are planning to use the appraisal system as a way to monitor compliance. But actually nearly 30% said that they were planning to keep some kind of hours requirement, which is obviously how things have worked under the previous regime for many years.
There must be pitfalls to that.
There certainly are. I mean, I think it's got the benefit of being familiar, it's very easy to monitor, it gives people a benchmark, but my concern with that would be that actually it doesn't reflect the spirit of the new regime, because it isn't about tailoring it to the individual and what their learning needs are.
I think you said earlier one of the benefits that solicitors have found is the flexibility, because of course it doesn't just necessarily mean turning up to a conference room, does it?
No, indeed, and I think a lot of solicitors are planning to cover a wider range of topic. It was about 50% of our respondents. So, and this would tie in with the competence statement and the slight broadening of what people can really cover. There's less of a focus on the technical practice, and indeed we're also looking at topics like ethics, professionalism and judgment, how people work with others, teamwork, collaboration, and how they manage their own work. So things like timekeeping, for example. And I think that's an indication of solicitors really taking on a role as a business advisor as much as anything else.
So in terms of competence, it's not just the old-fashioned black letter law, is it? There are these 4 strands which are set out in the Solicitors Regulation Authority regulations.
Yes, that's correct. So I think it's very important that people are thinking about all 4 areas. It may be that actually they decide that one of those areas is slightly less relevant, or an area that they need to focus on less this year perhaps, but it's very important that people are thinking about all 4.
So it's not the traditional training, inverted commas, is it? It's a whole range of activities that are appropriate.
Absolutely, but what we've actually found is that 80% of firms are still planning to use face-to-face training.
Sure.
And obviously there's still huge value in that. It's still an excellent way to learn. You get to interrogate an expert with your own particular questions. You have the benefit of meeting with your peers and networking with them. So I'm really pleased to see that people aren't planning on just ditching that because they feel they don't have to do it anymore, because it's still
And of
very
course
valid.
you have the benefit that you've set aside the time to really focus on
Indeed,
the training rather
yeah.
than having to do it in bits and pieces.
But we have seen a growing interest in using online technology as well. So a lot of interest in using webinar recordings such as this, but also reading in print magazines or online articles that will help people. But interestingly, a lot less interest in audio and podcast.
So podcast didn't come up particularly strongly?
No, it was around 20% of respondents who said that they would expect to use that as part of their training.
Right. Good. Do you think, or did the survey find that solicitors spend more or less time on learning and development under the new regime?
Well, this was where there were some interesting comparisons to the 2014 survey, when I would say there was a bit more scepticism about the regime, partly because of the lack of detail. So at this time, 16% of our respondents said that they thought solicitors would spend more time on training in comparison to 14% in 2014. But the really big difference is that actually this time round, only 9% of respondents said that they thought solicitors would be spending less time, compared to nearly 50% in 2014.
That was very high, wasn't it?
It was very high, and I think it was probably a little bit alarming at the time that people were thinking this was maybe an opportunity just to do a lot less, to spend less valuable time on learning. So I think it is a little bit about a change in perception that actually you can count a lot more. So I would hazard a guess that many solicitors now who are only recording 16 hours of CPD, they're probably doing 50 hours, if not more, by the time you count in all the reading that you might do, keeping yourself updated in less formal ways through meetings with colleagues and so on. But the other comments that people made as part of the survey was that they saw some of the administrative aspects of the new regime could actually be quite time consuming. So I think there may be a little bit of people including that in their answer.
Going back to the three-stage process of reflection, selection and collection, of course collection is really important here, but I think what you're saying is that should be as simple as possible so people do record things accurately but simply.
Absolutely, and as you said, it's really a continuous process, so it isn't something that you just do on the 31st of October, it's something that you do all year round, so it's really important that you have a way to record that is very simple. So perhaps an app or a tool that means that as soon as you come out of a training course, you can get out your phone and you can record your notes there and then, rather than going back to the office and just finding it's lost in the massive emails that have come in since you left.
And of course, there are two really important reasons why you should record this stuff. First of all, if the SRA ever came knocking at the door at dawn, you can prove what you've done. But secondly, should you ever be sued for negligence, you can produce your training record to say that you are up to speed in terms of competence.
Indeed, absolutely, and the SRA have said that a well-recorded training regime would be a mitigating factor in any reason they might have to investigate you, or conversely, that if you didn't have one, that would be an aggravating factor. But actually, I think it's also as simple as it's just a good thing to do. You can
see what you've done.
Exactly.
And it helps the next reflection process.
Indeed, yes. And I think for a lot of people, it's quite a motivational aspect to be thinking about how have I developed over the course of the year. I think it can be quite easy to lose that in a very busy day job.
You said earlier, Anna, that people have seen benefits for the new regime. What sort of benefits did people come up with on the survey?
Well, 62% of our respondents were very pleased that it encourages solicitors to undertake learning and development that's really focused and relevant. Lots of comments that it's good to be moving away from the rush that we've already alluded to at the end of the CPD year. 50% are pleased that there's more flexibility in the types of training that they can undertake. As we've already said, it doesn't have to be chalk and talk in a classroom, it could be conversations with colleagues. And 45% were actually quite pleased with the aspect of greater personal responsibility. And as we said, that training does have a lot of value in terms of improved client service, improved staff engagement.
And of course, you're better than the guy down the road if you've been properly trained.
Exactly.
In terms of business development.
Exactly, but of course there always are the sceptics, and we had 22% of respondents who really saw no advantages to the new regime.
Now, of course, over the past 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of resistance to initially the proposals of the SRA and now the actual implementation of it. Were there any comments, drawbacks people saw to the new regime?
There certainly were, as we've mentioned already. So 57% thought it would be harder to be confident of compliance. The SRA have said they're not looking to second guess people; they are looking to support people. So I think it remains to be seen what may actually happen in terms of enforcement. But that's certainly the number one concern that people had. And 46% were concerned about the misapprehension that training is no longer compulsory because the hours requirement isn't there. People think, well,
but of course it is compulsory, but it's not the simple hours system.
No, indeed, and so I think it's very important that firms are communicating this at all levels. I suspect probably more junior solicitors will get on board with this. They'll do what they're told. I think the challenge may come perhaps with more senior fee earners who feel that they don't need to sit back and look at what they do or don't know. They're very competent solicitors. They've been practising for many years. So I think the communication with more senior fee earners is absolutely crucial.
I mean, there is that old saying, continue to make the same mistakes but with greater and greater confidence. But I think what they have to realise is that there are now these 4 strands. It's not just about being good at the law, the particular law. It's about the ethics, working with yourself, working with others, and the black letter law. Indeed,
and I think particularly for more senior members of the profession who are very likely to have quite significant management responsibilities, I think it's good to signpost to them that things like learning about financial management, learning about management and supervision skills, that's all part of it.
Because traditionally, I hate to say this, many solicitors are not particularly good at that. They're very good at the law bit, but they're not about the business and the organisational bit. And of course, this is part of their whole regime of competence, isn't it?
It is.
Well, you talked about the administrative burden. Any advice on that or any thoughts from the surveys on that?
Well, I think the my advice would be to make sure that you're recording and reflecting on a regular basis.
Sure.
Perhaps set a calendar reminder to think about it once a month, so you're doing a relatively small amount on a fairly regular basis. Under the new regime, there is no way that you can do it all in the last 2 months of the year, because it requires looking at things right throughout the year and considering your development as you go, rather than just one intervention here or there.
So do you think these sort of cheap and cheerful get all your points in a day type events will end?
Well, I suspect they won't, because actually I do think that they have their own value. I think particularly for people who perhaps work in a smaller firm or have fewer opportunities to meet with peers, actually there is big value in that. But I think what people would need to do is look very carefully at the programme and see what value they think they would get from it. Is this actually the information
And that's the
that
reflection
you need?
process. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's about reflecting before you undertake an activity and reflecting again afterwards.
And what do solicitors think about the effectiveness of the new regime? Do you think there'd be better trained solicitors or more competent solicitors? What was the results there?
This is another area where we saw some interesting differences to the previous survey in 2014. So 24% said yes, they thought people would be better trained under the new regime, which is actually quite similar to the 23% in 2014. But this time round, only 20% said that they thought people would be worse trained in comparison to 40% in 2014. So I think that shows quite a shift in perception of the new regime. And again, the people who saw no change were around the same, 33% this year and 37% in 2014.
You mentioned earlier sole practitioners. They're often the ones that have the most visits from the SRA, funnily enough, or unfortunately enough. What specific things did the survey find out about them?
Well, actually, some of the findings were quite different to the wider population of respondents. So 70% told us that they hadn't actually opted in early, although 25% had, but indeed 5% didn't know. And I think where you're the sole practitioner suggests that you probably should know which regime you're operating under. But obviously, from the 1st of November, everyone is under the new regime anyway. There was certainly some scepticism about how the new regime will operate for sole practitioners. A third of respondents actually saw no advantages to the new regime in comparison to around 20% of the wider respondents. And 73% were concerned about the compliance aspect, which is even more than the wider population of respondents. But on the other hand, I think there is a certain sense from the respondents to the survey that actually maybe sole practitioners were sort of doing this anyway. So 2/3 have said that they thought there'd be little or no change to the amount of time that people spend on training activities, and nearly 50% foresaw no change at all in how well solicitors are trained. So I think it may well be the case that actually sole practitioners, because they have the opportunity to do things the way that they want to, actually they've perhaps been following something a bit closer to the new regime anyway.
Oh, that's interesting. So what are the most important things for solicitors as from 1st November?
Well, as we've already said, it doesn't mean no training. I think that's really the number one most important thing. I think it's important also that people are bearing in mind the 4 competencies, that it isn't just about technical legal training anymore. It's about being a well-rounded solicitor who offers excellent advice and is a valued team player in their firm. I would say also it's a really great opportunity to make learning and development a real asset within a firm, something that sets you apart, makes you a good employer, makes you a better solicitor. It gives people a say in their development, which I think people find very important. And also the recording is really important, as we've said. It's actually really not enough to be doing the training under the new regime. You need to be reflecting on it and recording, not just for the compliance aspect. As you said, there's a potential professional indemnity aspects of it as well. But also, I just think it's a valuable personal record for people to have.
And I think it's right to say that the Solicitors Regulation Authority have tools on their website and assistance to help you understand it. They do
indeed, and nearly 50% of our respondents said that they had used the SRA toolkit to some extent. There's plenty of valuable information on there. There are also some helpful templates that show, for example, that actually a Word document for your development plan and your development record is perfectly sufficient. It doesn't have to be really complicated. And my suggestion would be to really keep it as simple as you can.
So in essence, it's a process. There are now 4 strands that you need to be aware of in terms of your competence. You need to reflect, select and collect, as we've said. And I think it's right that the Solicitors Journal survey is now on the website.
It is indeed, yeah.
So you can, viewers can look at the absolute details of that.
Indeed they can. So I think really the important message now is that whatever you personally feel about the new regime, it's crunch time on the 1st of November.
So you have to do something.
You do indeed.
Anna, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
And thank you so much for watching. Thank you.